Welcome, everybody, to Blissfully Aware, the show in which three opinionated people discuss what's going on in fandom and nerd news in general. I am Bliss, and this week I am joined by a special guest, JD, PhD in fandom tomfoolery. Welcome.
Hi. Definitely PhD in fandom tomfoolery.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought for this particular discussion, you would be a very helpful second opinion. This week, we're going to discuss whether or not the American Auntie is a cult.
Like a cult phenomenon. Yeah. My doctorate isn't in this. I'm not that kind of doctor.
Oh, dang it. I didn't bring in the cult specialist.
No. No, but I have opinions. Trademark, copyright. I have opinions.
So, the reason we're going to talk about whether or not the American Auntie is some sort of modern day cult is because Twitter user Sam Obermeme? Name. Sam Obermeme. I'm super sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Sam. They published a work and actual academic paper. It's great and all that. So we're going to discuss that and the broader idea of this topic, right? I know they're apparently working on a second paper that is I think it's about boy love. Yeah, it's for queer lit studies. So
I read the book Girls Who Like Boys, and so I'm well versed in the phenomena. And yeah, honestly, I don't think I've read anything recently that has really changed my mind about much, except in like small ways that really only impact me and like in terms of like fandom. It's hard to find anything that's going to change your mind. And I think in terms of like academic papers about how antis are a cult, that's not going to sway any antis. They're in a cult.
oh, absolutely not.
Or specifically, they're manifesting in like micro cults. That's my opinion on that. I do think that they are manifesting into micro cults. I think in terms of like people trying to convince themselves that they are not a cult, they are focusing on the wrong thing. They're focusing on like very small aspects of what makes a cult,
Mhm.
and they're not focusing on the lower level bureaucratic nonsense tiers of what can create a cult. So you'd be hard pressed to find any like young person today who would not say Scientology, oh, is Scientology a cult? Yes, obviously Scientology is a cult. Does Scientology have a charismatic leader? It did, but it doesn't necessarily have to have one now. You have in some cases a governing body, but a lot of cults function on like a day-to-day individual basis where you have power distributed among smaller instances. So like say the Nixon cult, they had classes that were created by, like lower level, lower tiers, and there were a lot of women who never met the charismatic leader of the Nixon cult. Never met him. And this is why Allison Mack is facing a lot of backlash, because a lot of people, their only connection to this cult was the person who recruited them and the people who were actively blackmailing them and actively altering their sense of self and identity and everything like that. So when you have like, I should preface this by saying, there's some things that I say that are fact, some things that I say that are anecdotal, and some things that I say that are conjecture.
Mhm.
So, when you're listening to me talk about this, no matter how smart I sound, you have to be able to, remember. And sometimes I try to say, okay, this is conjecture, but anyway, I did a lot of research into cults, and a lot of this is verifiable. You have this structure to a lot of cults that antis don't have. But antis have an overarching belief system. they have like a common goal. Normally, they have a common goal, or at least a goal that is catered to by their individual like leadership. So each cell of antis, and maybe I shouldn't use the word term cell, but it works really well.
It does.
Yeah, each cell of antis has its leader. So you have a whole lot of antis in one grouping of like a Discord server, and the leader of that cell of antis will be whoever moderates that Discord server.
For sure.
Yeah, that's who's controlling information. Not only are they controlling information, they're controlling a sense of identity, because you are either in or you are out. You are an in group or you are an out group. And by further separating the members of their server, or further separating the members of their inner circle from outsiders who they will paint as evil or pedos, or they create this bubble around all of these. And usually antis are young, they're very young, they're children. They'll create a bubble around these children, and they will say inside the bubble is safe, outside the bubble is not safe. And that's very cult like.
It is. And I think, to back up just a little bit, uh, the whole idea of deciding whether or not an anti or anti-ism, the anti-fan, is a cult, I guess sort of boils down to how you define a cult. Because Kendra and I have had this conversation before. I personally think anti-dumb is a cult, but for Kendra, it does take some more steps. Wikipedia says, a cult is a social group that's defined by an unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical belief, or by a common interest in a particular personality, object, or goal. The sense of the term is controversial, having divergent definitions both in popular culture and academia. And typically, cults are also defined by having a charismatic leader. But, and not to pull a Goodwin's Law here, you find nowadays with, say, the American fascist movement, thanks to a good old boy, Louis Beam, that cults have started taking on a leaderless resistance, small cell group motif, let's say.
I mean, nobody's out here saying, like, if I were to say MAGA is a cult, okay, there's a lot of people who would be like, yeah, MAGA's a cult, because they would view Trump as the leader.
Right.
But that's not the case. Trump doesn't care about them.
Absolutely not.
He doesn't have a hand in their dealing. And not only that, they share an ideological viewpoint, but they don't share direction. Like, there are these little bubbles of the 3%ers and the Proud Boys, two separate cells, but they are all MAGA. And they have an overarching white supremacist ideal. So their ideology is based on white supremacy. Their ideology is based in Donald Trump being some kind of weird savior. The 3%ers, QAnon, they might have some overlap. Like, there might be some overlap in circles and cells, but there's not enough overlap in circles or cells to create a bureaucratic setup like with Scientology or like any of that. So I think you're right. I think the idea of a cult is kind of like amorphous. Like, you don't necessarily have to have every single thing for something to be considered a cult or cult like. So, you don't have to have some one savior. Although I do think that antis could theoretically like kind of condense into a not a singular group, but like a bigger group that does have a figurehead. I don't want to think about who would become that figurehead. I could speculate, but that's not going to help me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
so yeah, in Samantha Abrams in their paper here. I just like the title of their paper, The Cult Structure of the American Anti, kind of kills me, but I like it very much.
Okay, so I was actually really I was actually really apprehensive about this when you sent it to me because I'm looking at it and the very first thing I see is the cult structure of the American Anti, and it's not
Hmm.
capitalized. And I'm just like, because the author in me is like, every word in this should be capitalized except for of the, you know.
Hmm.
But then when I read through it, it was like, oh yeah, this reads like a normal academic paper. And I love scientists because like anthropologists and scientists and whatever, like sometimes you just read their stuff and it's just like, oh God, this is so smart, but man, did you have to say it like this?
Right.
Like, and that's normal for academic papers, which is really sad when you make it to college. And so, if any high schoolers are listening to this right now, let me tell you, college is very sad because you realize that most anthropologists and historians and scientists are not very good writers. But this actually isn't that bad.
It's not. There's a couple things that maybe could have used a little zhuzhing, but
Yes,
all in all, I think it's a good paper.
I think it's a great paper.
I find it interesting. I think, okay, so one of the criticisms of this paper I saw mostly by aunties, because let's be real, aunties did find this paper and took great offense and delight in being offended.
As one does.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that they tried to use to discredit this is the fact that in the paper, there are screenshots of tweets used as sources. And I need to just right up front put it on the record. Tweets are admissible evidence and can be used as sources.
Tweets are primary sources.
They are. I'm sorry. You can use it in lawsuits. It is
Yes.
it is your thought process you are putting into written form, and
Yes.
thus is a source or admissible evidence. So keep that in mind next time you're tweeting threats to people, or harassment, or libel.
Yes, tweets are considered primary sources. It's actually really interesting. When I was in school, I was a history major. Probably my legacy at my school was the history department was using one of my Tumblr posts, actually two of my Tumblr posts as teaching tools for their tutoring and that they were handing out in their classes because they could give out my blog posts instead of assigning a whole textbook on how to do Chicago style referencing and stuff like that because I just took all of the ones that you were actually going to use and I put them all in one place and I talked about sources and tertiary sources, secondary sources, primary sources, and tweets are primary sources. The thing about like anthropological or like cultural papers like these kinds of academic papers, is that they do not have what a lot of history papers have, which is something called a historiography. And that is a section of your paper that examines your sources for bias.
Mm-hmm.
So, because this paper was put together in a context that required a limit to the amount of space that they could use, and it was also put together not as a history paper, but as a pretty much like a sociology or anthropological cultural introspection, it's not going to have a historiography. So it's not going to go through every single source, every single tweet and say, well, this person thinks this and this person's a Nazi and this person's this, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So you kind of have to take each and every tweet and examine it and say, okay, this person's coming from here. Is this tweet being placed in a context that is neutral, positive? And of course, in this type of paper, generally it is presented neutrally.
Mm-hmm.
So because there's really not a persuasion happening here. This is just an examination. Yes, there is a bias. Of course there is. There's always going to be. You're never going to read a single thing that never has a bias. Obviously, this person thinks antis are a cult, and the word choice in the text is, is very telling that this person thinks that antis are a cult, and a harmful cult at that. And my bias I would word it much the same way. So, so like you have to kind of take that into account when you're looking at studies like this, and especially ones that are limited with to brevity like this.
Well, and I agree. It's like, obviously, you and I aren't even coming at this unbiasedly. Everybody has a bias.
Yes.
It's impossible not to. But so, in the paper, Sam uses the bite model to try and break down how anti behavior actually could, be applied to a cult scenario.
Hmm.
And bite is an acronym for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. So they go through, and under behavioral control, they talk about, antis creating a reward punishment hierarchy system that encourages obedience, and publicly shaming and controlling sexual expression and gender identity. Yes.
Yes, I think we can. I think we can firmly check that one off. I mean, you see every day this ingrained and unquestioned self-loathing that they instill in a lot of kids. It's based on identity. It's based on race. It's based on anything that they can get their hands on. Their sexual preferences. It's based on anything that they can theoretically. They can't control, but they can behave around.
Well, yeah, I even saw, this was a couple months ago, but an auntie trying to convince other people that being attracted to your own body was somehow some sort of fetishization, and uh, uh, essentially they were calling it like a sin. You were a pedophile if you found yourself sexy and you were a minor. So, like, any foothold they can find.
What?
Under information control, spreading disinformation and rumors, spying using people's personal information against them, discouraging engagement with all non anti sources. So, yes, I would agree.
Yes, there are a lot of lies.
Oh, God, right? So, thought control, using loaded language like pedophilia and incest, which are no longer words that have meaning. Like,
Yeah.
we've lost those words to the discourse as reactionary buzzwords.
Yes.
Rejecting critical thinking, using narratives of us versus them, only encouraging, quote,
Hmm.
pure, unproblematic thoughts as designated by the group. So, yeah, your small Discord cells decides what's problematic and what isn't. You have to
Yes.
abide by what the group decides.
And generally speaking, like if you're in one cell that accepts one thing and in another cell that accepts the other thing, you are forced to choose.
Yep.
Yeah. If you choose to be more progressive, you are either hiding it from the other cell, or if you choose to be more of a Puritan, you are either hiding that from the other cell and you just don't interact with them, or you withdraw from that and you go to the more conservative cell.
Oh, absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
so then we go on to emotional control, which is, I think, the biggest reason people can't escape the anti circle is this sense of fear that is so thoroughly instilled. So, what they say is instilling fear of leaving the group by creating self doubt and threatening expulsion and targeting, focusing on negative emotions, and upsetting content while praising hostility. So, yeah, I mean, when you're an anti, you are encouraged to bully and dox and harass people. So the idea of then being ostracized means you are now on the chopping block of now becoming the target of that doxing, bullying, harassment, and so forth. Like, it isn't already incredibly hard to like leave a cult. And I think this is the simplest way to explain why in this particular setting.
Yes, because a lot of cults, their main thing is everybody outside this cult is evil and bad and we don't want to be like them. So if you are trying to leave, then you are evil and bad and you don't want to be like them. So like there's no way for you to leave that setting without being completely ostracized. And uh, a lot of the problem is that you've been cut off from everyone outside. So when you try to leave this setting, you don't have any
Mm-hmm.
friends. And you don't have anybody who understands what you're going through. Like you have been through a trauma of being in this setting. And you've been through a trauma of discovering your trauma. Like I don't know why people don't focus on this, but discovering that you have been traumatized is in itself traumatizing. Like because you're reliving it. Because you're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm having these flashbacks of like everything that happened and I have to go through it piece by piece and realize what these people were doing to me." You know, you kind of have to have that 2,000-yard stare for a little bit because wow, were they doing it on purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Like and a lot of anti-cells, some of them no, they're not doing it on purpose. They're doing it because of a a purely held belief. But you can say that about Scientology as
Oh yeah.
well. You know, any religion, any structure that when you leave or you go against their teachings seeks to cut you off or send you to conversion therapy or make you go to some camp or like tries to control your thoughts, that's a cult and that's traumatizing and that's something, they are exerting a social control over you and that's a manifestation of self-censorship.
Well, and I think it's also a struggle to leave, depending on the circumstances in which you're leaving, let's say. Let's
Yes.
preface
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Admitting that you've done something wrong is hard. And then
Mhm.
admitting that you've done something wrong and now realizing that that can also be done to you by the people that you thought were your friends is a
Mhm.
huge deterrent for people. The second they even get that inkling of, hey, maybe this is wrong, that can go right to the back burner because that fear of, well, if it's wrong and I was wrong, then does that mean, because it's that us versus them, does that mean I'm part of the
Mhm.
them instead of the us? Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, and like I feel like it's so difficult for a lot of people to kind of just make peace with themselves like to
Mm-hmm.
begin with. Like not even in a cult, it's like there's just so much going on. We're such complex human beings. You know, the amount of work that you have to go through to determine your sense of identity and determine like where your morality is and all this stuff. It's so much easier to let somebody else determine that
Mm-hmm.
for you. But then also you have to when you're faced with this life-changing blow of like, "Oh no, was I wrong?" Then you have to flip it all on its head, and that's a lot of work. If you go to your cult support group and you say, "Hey guys, I'm having doubts," and they love bomb you and they tell you, like, "Oh my gosh, these we've all had these thoughts and it's totally normal, but we love you here and that would never happen to you because you're pure and like we can help you get back on the right track and blah blah blah." So like you can go through like the love bombing stages, you can go through the shaming stages, but generally they're not going to shame you until you're too far gone.
Oh, absolutely.
Or it's sort of like the Nixon cult where they would force you to give them compromising
Mm-hmm.
information about you, and they would use that, and they would say, "Wow, it would really suck if your mom knew that you're gay," or it would really suck if you have to do this thing or we'll dox you, "Oh, I know where you live."
Well, and Sam brings up the hashtag support ex antes, which is a hashtag that and I feel like a lot of people knew was going to sort of put a target on your back,
Yes,
right?
yes.
If you actually were an ex-ante and you use this hashtag, people already don't want to tag problematic content
Mm-hmm.
because it puts a target on your back.
It does.
But so Sam brings up, while the majority of hashtag support ex antes posts were positive, some antes invaded the hashtag. And some of the quotes from antes are, quote, "You will die a lonely death and have no friends and family to call yours." Or another posted image that read, "We're going to beat you to death." So once you've left, it's just a matter of now we have to harass you. We have to, because that is the model in which we like run this cult.
Well, and that's also performative as well. So every time they post one of the memes that says, you know, I'm going to beat you to death or kill yourself, any of that, it's performing for the other antis that follow them. It's like when you're undercover and you have to, you know, snort the cocaine in the bathroom because if you don't, you know, the drug lord's gonna know. Like that
Oh,
you're a
hells
cop.
yeah, bestie.
Yeah. So even if a lot of these kids are probably secretly, you know, they probably have a secret account where all they follow is all the problematic artists that they find from their auntie friends sharing them and saying, "Isn't this disgusting?" And it's like, "Yes, it's so gross." And then they go to their other account and they follow them, you know, and it's like, "Oh, just make sure you don't get your accounts crossed up."
Then you're going to be Ted Cruz
Yeah.
liking porn on 9/11.
Yeah, like you know, like you just gotta make sure you got that organization. I really feel for these kids who have gotten like caught up in the anti-ideology because you know, like kids aren't ideologically pure ever.
No.
Kids are little monsters. Like, I'm sorry, you want to be part of the in group. You say what you want to say to be in the in group, and you force yourself to be uncomfortable because that's what's cool. And it's sad because the support ex antes tag was really useful for a lot of, you know, these kids that were like, "Oh my gosh, like I can, you know, I can finally talk to somebody. I can finally talk to them about, you know, this trauma that I've been through with these aunties, blah 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 blah." But then they were opening themselves up to harassment, and that time period saw a lot of new accounts started by aunties, and they were just testing the water.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying, you know, "I am an ex-ante. I want to follow a bunch of pro shippers," which for the record, I don't identify as a pro shipper. I just wanted to put that one out there.
For sure.
There were a lot of ex-antes that were like, I am new to, you know, like the pro shipping scene. You know, I know a lot of people might not trust me, and you know, I'm gonna try to stay away from the people that I have harassed in the past because it would really suck. I'm sorry, but it would really suck to find out that somebody who followed you and was interacting with your posts was like an auntie, you know, 3 months ago who sent you death threats.
That would be rough to find out.
Yeah, like it would be like, "Oh, yes, I'm going to be, you know, I'm gonna have this whole discussion with you, and there, you know, some 20-year-old who sent you a death threat 3 months ago, but like you don't know that." And it's like, man, like I have no problem giving some people the benefit of the doubt and like second chances, but that would be rough to find out that
Mm-hmm.
because I've had people tell me like they were like, "Hey, you know, this is me. Maybe you remember me, maybe you don't. I sent you a death threat, you know, like blah, blah, blah. I'm really sorry about that. And I've turned a new leaf. You know, can I follow you?" And back when I had an actual public account, I was like, "Yeah, you can follow me." But private account,
Oh yeah.
fuck you. Like, no way. I don't even let some people that I knew follow my private account. Like,
Oh yeah. No, I'm very selective of the people who get to see my private account. Although it's mostly me complaining about, having a tummy ache or not sleeping well, or, I cried because I watched a sad episode of an anime today. You follow my private.
yeah, I do. I do follow your private account. Your private account is pretty tame compared to mine anyway.
Yeah, you have all the good stuff on your private.
And I spent the better part of this past year on nothing but my private account. And part of that was the fact that my public account, I didn't keep that username, so I was impersonated. So
Ah, the great
that was
impersonation.
great. That was great. I love that. That was when I was on like the height of antidepressant. So it was like, so I'm like cackling about it. I'm like, ah, look, guys, I'm famous. I was tickled to the bone, I tell you what. I just thought that it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I was like, "Ah," like, I thought it was really funny. I thought it was kinda cute. But, like, I didn't think it was particularly malicious. But, yeah, I mean, that in itself, kind of portrays the cult-like personality in some pro-ship spaces, because that did not happen from an anti. That was not an anti, that was a pro-shipper.
Well, and so let me ask you this. Because we're talking about whether or not the American Anti is a cult. Do
Yeah.
you think, to a lesser extent, or even to the same extent, that pro shippers, self identified pro shippers, is a type of cult? And that this is tricky, and like, I should preface, like, obviously, no offense to anybody, this is purely like hypothetical, but.
I've already been canceled on Twitter like like twice. So I can unironically just kind of go ahead and say yes to this. And I'm going to tell you why. Because there's the same kind of reactionary thought control
Hmm.
in some pro shipper spaces, and pro shippers also have cells of pro shippers. They are all combined under a similar ideology, much like antis are, but some of them are more conservative, some of them are more progressive. I'm going to say the like conservative pro shippers are more reactionary. They are more likely to make exceptions to censor what they like, content that they don't like, and they you do have to choose between factions a lot of the time. So, like there are pro shippers that I will interact with, but on an individual basis. Like not every rainbow meaty is my friend,
Hmm.
but in general, a lot of rainbow meaties are gonna speak to me. Some of them hate me. That totally does not bother me in the slightest. Like that's the antidepressants. This is a power Prozac. But there's kind of like this, you've got these factions that kind of like sometimes they can work together and sometimes they can't, and you can have major differences between the two of them, like between two of them or between three of them or between all of them, but they are under a united banner of fiction is not one to one with reality. Their ideology is pretty firmly set. Some of them are more into anti-censorship, some of them are to censorship, but with our rules, which is very anti of them, but like whatever.
Hmm.
So you have this kind of like cult like structure. They do have strong personalities that kind of not govern them, but sort of like lead them. The personalities are very loud, they're very big, and they are not above lying, same as antis. So, you kind of have to judge on like a personal basis. This is why I don't identify as a pro shipper, because I am leery nowadays of anyone who labels themselves and is loyal to more than just friendships. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to jump
Yep.
into the fire for someone you don't even know just because they argued against an auntie one time with you. No, like
Hmm.
that's no bueno.
I genuinely, and I see this with pro shippers, and I see this with antis, obviously. Having a conversation is not always having an argument. Disagreeing about something is not
Mhm,
always an argument. And even arguing about something is not the
mhm,
end of the world. You are allowed to
mhm,
argue with people. I had a conversation with Kelty this morning in which we did not agree about something. And that is not the end of the world. we're still best friends. We will continue to be best friends. We later on in the day had a conversation about nothing and it was just fine. It's okay to disagree with your friends or with people. I think in pro shipping and anti spaces, specifically in this like very niche corner of fandom, it becomes almost cult like because you feel like you have to agree with the people on your side because it's an us versus them scenario now. So anybody with a rainbow meat in their username, you have to just go and
Right.
run and defend without reading through the thread and seeing if maybe you actually do agree with or find what they're
Hmm.
saying defendable. Like, obviously, if they're getting harassed and being sent a death threat, sure, I'd jump in and be like, hey, let's not. How
Right.
about no? But, like, before I jump in and defend anybody, and I'm talking even people I'm friends with, like,
Hmm.
friends with,
Hmm.
I will read through the thread first to decide whether or not that's a conversation that I feel warrants me defending. Is if that's a hill I'm
Yeah.
willing to die
Yeah.
on that day.
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple, and I would characterize them as rainbow meaties, where I pulled them aside, and in a DM, and I would say, "Hey, this is indefensible. You know, like we can talk this through. You know, we can reconsider like this argument because this is not something that is sustainable as an argument. Like this is not something that needs to be said. Like it's not necessary to have this conversation with this person. It's too reactionary. You don't have the whole story, blah, 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 blah. You know, like, because a lot of times when you're acting emotionally, that's when you have reactionary responses. And
Mm-hmm.
reactionaryism is what I have decided is the bane of my existence. So, you know, if I see one of my friends or even people who aren't necessarily my friend, I'll call them in before I call them out.
I love
And if
that.
I can't call you in
Mm-hmm.
and it's important enough, I'm gonna call you out.
I love that. I love the idea of calling in versus calling out because that's something I think we should be doing a little bit more
Yes.
is having the discretion of being willing to pull somebody aside.
I've I've pulled aunties aside. I've legit DM'd aunties and sometimes it's just a matter of they need to get that thought out and you're not going to change your mind. You can't. It's you know, and I've asked aunties. I've said, "Are you ever concerned that you know this harassment is going to come back on you one day?" And the answer is no. They don't believe it'll happen. And maybe it won't. And hey, that'd be great if it doesn't. I really hope it doesn't. Calling in is a an underused tactic, and the most important part about that, to quote the book title, conflict is not abuse. There's not been a single time that I have
Mm-hmm.
felt abused by anyone in any group chat that I've ever been in. Anyone who has called me in because I've been called in. Heck yeah, I have. Calling out can happen. Like it's a thing that sometimes needs to happen, but calling in is very underrated. And I think some people call out because their emotions get a hold of them. And
It's tricky because you have to also have the person you're speaking to that you're calling in be receptive to that. Because if they're also in an emotional place and they perceive that as a non public call out of sorts, you have to be willing to accept that they are not in a place to hear you.
yes, yes, you have to allow them the space to process what you've told them because
Mm-hmm.
like, there's and let's go back to the cult. It's really easy to be nice to somebody who is out of a cult, who has escaped a cult. It is really hard to be nice to somebody who's still in one.
It's interesting. It's interesting the idea treating antis and even treating pro shipping like they're cults, like they're two
Yeah.
warring cults. I mean, it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't give us any like tools to help alleviate the issues. That still comes down to individuals deciding what hills they're going to die on, how they're going to talk to other people, how they're going to handle harassment and specific situations. like using a call in versus a call out. But I think, at least for me, wrapping my head around the current temperament of where fandom is these days, because it's so hard to, as we've discussed on the show, separate pro shipping and antis from fandom at large these days. I think it gives me a little bit of hope that this cult behavior will die down, as a lot of cults do. A lot of them tend to like crumble under their own weight. Not all of them, but I don't think the Puritans and the Proshippers are going to be able to sustain something with like any amount of longevity. I don't think fucking 5, 10 years from now fandom is gonna look like this. I mean, fucking 5, 10 years in the past, fandom wasn't like this. It is a evolving thing, as everything in life is. And I think we get caught up because we're in this moment, thinking, well, it's only going to get worse. That we need to take a step back and say, well, okay, hold on. Because we got past the 2013 Tumblr days. We survived the Super Hulock Wars.
I think fandom mirrors a lot of cultural trends, like worldwide cultural trends, and especially American cultural trends, because the internet is so America centric, and especially Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And 2016, the whole like Trump administration, you had like this influx of, this nationalism, this pride, this kind of this example of how misinformation can get you what you want, and there's no repercussions, there's no consequences to that. You can just shut out everybody who disagrees with you. You can claim that they're attacking you, even if it's just counter speech, because a lot of what people say is harassment is actually just counter speech. You are presenting speech,
Mm-hmm.
they are presenting counter speech, and counter speech does not have to be polite.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess to get back to the article,
Yeah.
the paper concludes essentially saying, yeah, instead of being given the tools and resources to make safe and educated decisions on a case by case basis, teens in anti spaces are called to arms and encouraged to engage in recklessly abusive behavior towards themselves and others over topics they do not yet fully understand, while simultaneously spreading troubling ideologic misinformation. And I agree. I hope that a lot of aunties will grow out of this behavior and not just turn into adult QAnon.
Very, very optimistic.
I really do hope that. I try not to be a pessimist. I know that a lot of the current height of this whole pro ship versus anti ship debacle we're at with it is in reaction to the QAnon purity movement, the general just like protect the children movement that was brought on by the 2016 American election and Trump. And then COVID locking us all inside and online terminally.
Hmm.
So hopefully, moving forward, we will have or develop some sort of tool to move past this, because it's unsustainable. I genuinely do think and hope that these aunties are aware that their behavior will haunt them for the rest of their life. They will have to carry their actions with them for the rest of their life. I carry actions and things that I said and did as a teenager with me to this day. And that is just straight up, it's not a warning, it is a statement of fact. You are going to get older one day and look back on your actions now. Not that there are any aunties listening to my show.
Maybe they will when they find out that I called Proshippers a cult. I apologize to anyone who takes offense to that. You're feel free to yell at me in my DMs. I don't care. I love you all.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I don't think I love pro shippers. I really do, for the most part. I mean, if I had to pick what side I'm on, if I really had to pick, gun to head, I would be
Yes.
a pro shipper, right? I
Yeah.
don't like to use that term, but it feels like the further we get along in this whole debacle, you really are forced to pick this side. But yeah, I mean, I have some faith that moving forward things will get better in fandom. I do hope that these aunties who are out here doxing people and outing people and suiciding, baiting people, really, really do have a dark night of the soul, though.
I
I hope that.
You know what? I maybe maybe they'll have a come to Jesus, because like, think of all the emotions that you've had throughout your life, and think of all of those come to Jesus moments you've ever had. Just one of those.
JD, I'm Jewish.
Okay, so not come to Jesus. Come to
I'm kidding.
Moses.
Go ahead.
Come to Moses. I need a euphemism for when, Moses came down from the mountain and like everybody turned around and, they were like real shocked.
Don't look at our golden calf.
It's not what you think. um no, I think it's optimistic, but I also think that you've got time on your side, mostly because like when a lot of aunties become 18, they suddenly realize, oh no, I'm not pure anymore, and they realize that they can't have the friends that they had because their circles won't allow them to. And some circles allow the only adults there are the ones that have the power. And if they don't want you to have the power, they're not going to let you stick around. So it's an interesting dynamic, and that's one leg up that Proshippers have. It's that they're adults; they're pretty firmly within their identities already. They have a pretty firm idea of what their morality is, and they already have everything kind of set in stone. Not all of them. Sometimes you throw them for a loop. I think I've thrown many Proshippers for a loop. Um, But yeah, I do think Proshippers are a cult a little bit.
Yeah, but we love you.
Yeah, I love you.
I don't know, JD. Did we even talk about the thing?
We talked about the thing. We talked about it's the cult. The cult. That was the thing.
Yeah, cults. Fandom is a cult in general these days.
Fandom is a cult. There's a bunch of warring cults.
Just cults on cults on cults all the way down.
Cults on cults on cults.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap up then. I feel like we talked about the
Okay.
thing.
We talked about the thing, and then I went and had rants, and I'm so sorry.
You're fine.
Hopefully you can cut that into something usable.
Absolutely. And I mean, I brought you on specifically because this is some tomfoolery, man. I mean, obviously, aunties are not going to go down in the ledger as being a cult, and neither are Proshippers. This is all purely just for the sake of us having
A
a
conversation.
hypothetical conversation, yeah. So, so every episode I like to end with asking all of us to talk about one happy thing we're either doing or has happened to us this week so that we end on a positive note. JD, do you have a happy?
I do. I do have a happy. It happened this morning. I'm so excited about this. As I was walking to work this morning, I was distracted by this little kid who was waving at me from across the street, and he waved at me, so I waved at him because when a little kid waves at you, you wave at the little kid. And
Mm-hmm.
he looked at his father after I waved at him, and he said, "Who is she?" Like I was famous. And I have thought about that all day.
Aw.
Yes.
JD, that's adorable.
Yeah, he was like, "Who is she?" And I was just like, "Ah." Like, and of course his dad's like, "Ah, yeah, she lives over there." Like, but I was like, "Ah, yes, it's like I'm Beyonce."
Well, so my happy is I've started playing Breath of the Wild again. I watched the Game Grumps play through it while I was drawing, and then I had to play again because monkey see, monkey do.
Toads.
I'm having a good time being Link and killing monsters, so that's been fun. That's made me happy this week.
That's such a beautiful game too.
Oh, it's so pretty.
It is.
Well, so JD, thank you so much for joining me this week and helping just have this conversation, this hypothetical. I appreciate you. Dr. JD, PhD, Fandom Tomfoolery.
Fandom tomfoolery.
I hope
Perfect.
to have you back on for more Fandom Tomfoolery in the future.
Oh, God. Okay.
Prepare your butt. You are now on speed dial.
Oh, God. Okay. If anybody who is listening who hates me, you're gonna get an earful from it.
If you hate JD, you're welcome to come and at me. I don't guarantee I'll answer, but
She
you
may
could try.
send you Bo Burnham's problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you'd like to find us online, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Blissfully Show. I post links to our YouTube there. If you're watching us on YouTube, hi, hello. Let me know if you think antis and or proshippers qualify as a cult. I'm actually really interested to hear what some of y'all have to say. And then, until next time, bye! Oh my god, give me 2 seconds. I forgot their username.
My gosh, what kind of tomfoolery is this?